What about the relationship that you guys have with the drivers? Because there are very few people in this world who ever actually get to drive a real life Formula One car. So presumably they're your best reference in terms of how the game feels compared to the real thing. So first of all, how much time are you able to get with them? And how much do they offer you in terms of shaping the way these things actually drive?
So I think for starters, we sort of have a really good solid starting point for a Formula One car these days. And it's often the nuance and the intricate detail that we pick up from the drivers more so. But in terms of, sort of what we get back, when we started this back in 2010, obviously we'd never built a Formula One car. We didn't understand what a Formula One car should feel like. So we started working with Anthony Davidson, and and that's continued. Ant's always been part of the team and part of the project. In fact, I was talking to him the other day, and I found a photo of him sat in the office with the BAFTA, because we won a BAFTA in 2010, and obviously he was part of that team.
Yeah.
So Ant's been absolutely invaluable, and obviously as a test driver. Now, a sim driver for Mercedes, he's excellent at giving feedback. But obviously now, as the game's becoming more widely accepted by the drivers as well, we've always had the opportunity to spend some time with the drivers, usually when the team want to collect some promotional material through the game, or we want to do the same. And then it gives us a great opportunity while that's going ahead to just chat to the drivers. And it's been fantastic over the years. I mean, I think I was really lucky. The first driver I got to actually record some footage was Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis got in the seat, and he was just sort of taking it easy, having a bit of fun. And then we told him what lap time his brother had done, and that was it. He was on it, and he was fully engaged. He was talking about the game. He was asking questions about it, and that was 10 years ago. But then more recently, last year we were in Austria, and we had Pierre Gasly. And he was doing just a piece for Red Bull, and he sat in the seat. He was doing some time trial, and we couldn't get him out. And he was, again, just giving us these great little nuggets of information. I think something I've talked about quite a few times already this year is that the changes to the way the ERS works in game came about from a comment that Lando just made off the cuff when we were at the esports last year to one of the guys. And they got back to the office and said, Lando mentioned that the ERS doesn't work like that, and this is how it should be. We said, well, can we get him to elaborate on that? And he gave us few tidbits that just gave us, well, we can do that. We can change that. And then only recently, again, talking to Ant, he was saying, the traction in a Formula One car, he said it feels more like when you've got medium traction control in F1 2019. And that's something that we've resolved in 2020, is now that the traction you've got way much more confidence on traction. So it's those little things that you might not consider, those little nuances, those little intricacies that the drivers just come out with.
Yeah, and it's such a valuable source of information, isn't it? Because, as I say, there's so very few people that ever really get to experience it. The rest of the world are experiencing it through things like this, through the game itself, but they're all emulating these guys. So to have access to them is such an amazing and valuable resource. So really interesting to hear that you've got some real life examples of their feedback really changing the way things work. So that's great. The other thing I wanted to really talk to you about was the tracks, how your relationship with them is, how you get the data, particularly given that we've had a couple of new tracks on the calendar this year. Or that was the plan, at least. So Zandvoort and, of course, Vietnam. Whenever you get a new circuit like this, I guess in the same way that teams have to model that or get that CAD model into their own simulator systems, is it exactly the same way? The circuit sends you a CAD model that you then work from?
Yeah, so it comes obviously from multiple sources. So circuits supply data. Formula One obviously have data because they have to sign off on the circuits. So obviously it comes via Formula One in that we get the officially signed off data. That's what they've authenticated as being the FIA sanctioned, whatever they have to do to get the circuit signed off. Then that comes through Formula One to us. We also get data through the circuits themselves as well. And in the case of Zandvoort, we had lidar data for the circuit because it's built on a floodplain. So the government over there have fantastic data for the region, and then also we have access to the circuits themselves for photogrammetry and photographic reasons. So photogrammetry gives us the ability to send somebody out there with a series of cameras and take incredibly detailed photos of certain elements of the track. So the way the curbs are modeled, the way the grass merges with the curbs, the way the barriers sit against certain things. And then we also have a photographer who visits the circuits, and he walks around and just takes 360-degree photos all the way around the circuit for us. And that's where we get the fine detail.
And what about laser scanning? Because I know the teams obviously do that for their own in-house simulators. Is that something that you've done or plan to do or incorporate in future models?
Yeah, so our first foray into a lidar scan track was Zandvoort this year. Like I said, we had lidar data for the circuit, and obviously that was the circuit as it was before the banked curve was added and before the small tweaks have come in. So obviously everything we've done since then has been based on the data we've been provided. But yeah, we used lidar data for Zandvoort. It gave us we've completely changed the process for building a circuit off the back of that, because it's obviously gives us a very different way to start. It's something we're continuing to look at for the future, because we want the tracks to be accurate.
How long would you say that takes from the point of you getting first contact? If a new circuit's announced, let's say on a calendar, and I guess even more difficult with street circuits when those things can only spring up at the last moment. But how long do you reckon that process takes from first contact to actually building a circuit fully?
I mean, talking to our art department, they put a 1 year's worth of man hours on building a track.
Wow.
Obviously, there's a significant number of people on the team who do that.
Yeah.
But they put, so a track is it's the biggest undertaking on the entire project. So when a new circuit comes in, that's a huge undertaking. And as you mentioned, somewhere like Hanoi, for example, we obviously had a very good idea of what the circuit was going to be, but there were obviously changes going on for some period of time, and we were sent, this is what we think the layout's going to be. So we start building the bits that we're pretty much 100% confident aren't going to change. There are some parts of that circuit that just can't change because of the regional layout of the streets. But then there were obviously some small tweaks, but we kept abreast of those, so we can work on those pretty quickly.
Okay, so one more question that I've got, and then I'm going to run a couple of questions that people have asked me on Twitter, if that's okay. And for me, one of the things I was really interested in was there has been talk in the past of using simulations, using games to test out potential rules, future rules for Formula One. So, for example, trying different grid formation layouts, maybe different qualifying formats, things like that. Is that something that your relationship with Formula One could potentially offer in the future? Something that could help shape the actual rules of real life Formula One?
I mean, the game's a perfect tool for it, isn't it, really? I think we see now that the AI are particularly realistic as well in the way they behave, so we can run great simulations on things like that. It's certainly not out of the question. It's certainly something the game would very much lend itself to.
Yeah, okay, well, that'd be cool. Now, I've got a couple of questions that some people have sent me on social media, if you don't mind indulging in those. One that lots of people ask me, actually, is VR going to be a possibility in the future?
So I'll say now it's not going to make 2020. This year we actually worked with another company to get split screen in the game. We felt split screen was something that the audience really did want, and we've had a lot of people requesting that, and it's been so well received since we've announced that split screen's in the game. But yes, we do want to include VR at some point in the series, and it is something that we're doing. We are now looking at very, very seriously. It's technically quite difficult in a Formula One game. There are so many things that we need to take into account. As you can imagine, it's very fast, and Formula One makes people somewhat queasy on a VR headset. So there's a lot of things we need to consider there.
Yeah.
Also, the way that the on-screen display is presented, the way the menus work. There's a lot more than just actually hooking up the on-track experience. There's a lot more that goes with that. So, if we do VR at some point, which is very much something we're planning to do in the future, we want to do it right.
Okay, that's exciting. Somebody else mentioned the question that it's been raised a few times, particularly given that this has become more of a public thing now that we've not got real life racing. But there's a real disparity between what is your Codemasters game and something like an iRacing platform, for example. One's much more simulation based. One, I hope you don't think this is unfair in saying it's more of a game-based platform. Do you think that your game will move more towards a simulation type of platform, or do you think your mass market is still going to be very much consumer level games players?
Yeah, I always think this is a tricky one to answer in some ways, because our game's equally a simulation as everything else out there. We simulate all of those elements. That's what we do. The game is a simulation. All the way down to the way that the fuel's burnt. We simulate all of those elements. The way that the cars are set up to some people might be perceived as not being simulation, but it is simulated. So, it's hard to know what people are judging that based on. Why do they consider one to be simulation and one not to be simulation? We've certainly had feedback from the drivers this year of things that weren't quite right in the handling model, but the simulation itself is there. It's doing the biz. There's also a misconception that simulation means difficult. And that is something that is most definitely not the case. You speak to any Formula One driver, and yes, it's their day job, so they have to be good at it, but they say driving a Formula One car is easy. winning races is difficult, but driving a Formula One car is easy. And that's something obviously we're also very mindful of.
Yeah.
But as you'll have seen in the game this year, the things that we've talked about in 2020, you know, we're continuing to push the sim. We're continuing to find areas that aren't quite right. So this year, the way that we modelled the inertia in a wheel and a tyre, for example, that's a big difference. And I think you'll feel that very much so when you play the game. The way that the changing in the tyre pressure impacts on the temperature behaviour and the grip of the tyre and the feel of the car. You know, that's sim. You know, there's no way you can dispute that they're not sim options. But then we've gone to the other end of the scale this year and put in a bunch of accessibility options without touching what we do at the other end of the scale. So it's I think always that's a tricky one to answer, because I'm never quite sure what people's perception is of sim, why they consider something to be more sim than something else. Is it because it doesn't have a career mode, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, the replication of the real world sport that we have? Is it because it's just an on-track experience that it's deemed more sim? I don't know. It's what people's personal opinion is on those, I think. But you know, we simulate it all.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, I'm certainly just starting to, I'm relatively new to all this, but I'm really starting to get to grips with the technical details of it and what you can change and what effects they might have. And the depth that you can go to if you really want to is fascinating, is amazing. So I guess what you offer that perhaps some of the others don't is that you offer a complete range of, you can go really deep into the technical side, but if you don't want to, you can have a very sort of simplistic version of the game as well, which I guess covers more bases in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, we do stuff such as if you do a practice program, the data that the team gets in the practice session can alter the strategy that you'll run in the race. You know, I mean, that's as realistic as it comes. You do a few laps and you wear your tires heavily, the strategy you'll be given in the race will compensate for that, because that's what would happen, you know. So things like that, you know, I mean, they are pure sim-based options, you know, but to the casual, they won't play a major impact. But to that player who's going head-to-head against another player of a really high standard, and they're talking tense, you know, that's where those really fine margins come in.
Yeah, no, fantastic. One that I thought was interesting, Matt Amos on Twitter said, are they hoping to increase the F2 story mode that made for previous games into a full season?
Yeah, so the story mode's taking a break in 2020. We can't get rid of those two cool characters, but they are taking a year out for 2020. Obviously, the main focus was on my team. But what we have done with the F2, because we were still super happy to be able to get F2 in last year, and it's allowing us to build a driver market, obviously, in my team, because now you need a teammate and you instantly go to the F2 grid to try and find yourself, you know, your first teammate. But in terms of in the driver career, yes, you can now do a 3-race F2 taster before entering Formula One. You can do a half F2 season, or you can do a full F2 season before you actually move into Formula One.
Okay, all right, that's cool. Fox Z says, what is or has been the hardest aspect from real life F1 to make in the game?
What's been the hardest aspect? I mean, obviously, we've never driven Formula One cars, so we rely on a great deal of information from other people. Obviously, getting the ability for players to control a car that's traveling at 200 miles an hour plus, you know, with a controller is obviously quite challenging as well. But we've always just strived to as well represent more than just the on-track experience, and that's getting across to people all of the cool stuff that happens in Formula One. You know, I mean, we've been incredibly privileged, and you know, yourself, you would have spent years around the Formula One circus. It's amazing. It's just amazing, and that's why we build the extra environments. That's why we build the locations, and it's things like that that are hard to get across to the player, just how special Formula One is as a sport when you're traveling with Formula One, and that's something we try and get across as well.
How difficult is it for you when a sponsor changes? Is that a nightmare when, particularly like a sponsor on a car, but also sponsors around the track? Is that like your worst nightmare when that press release pops up? You're thinking, oh no.
It's not mine. It's somebody who models the tracks or the vehicles. We have process in place for all of this, so you know it's something we're used to. It's expected. They happen. You know, that's the way things go. We don't have any problem with that at all.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. Biscuit Marine 13 says, will the safety car be used more in the 2020 game?
More recently on 2019, we made some refinements to the safety car triggers and the way that works, and we've continued to refine those a little further for 2020 as well.
Okay. And I'll finish with one from me, if you don't mind, and that is just in terms of updates. So, you know, having worked for a team for so many years, the teams sort of plan to some extent their upgrade strategy over the course of a season, so they roughly know when and where their big upgrades are going to come. Do you have a similar thing? Do you know when you're going to plan the big upgrades for the game, or are you being very much reactive in that sense?
We have as you say, I wouldn't say a loose plan, but we have a plan with windows of time that we're happy to move around within. So, for example, we know that we will include the update for the Formula 2 to the 2020 season, and we will have a window where we think that will be achievable. Obviously, not everything is under our control, so we can't always guarantee with the date that we've given ourselves, but we obviously will announce that where we know. When it comes to once the game's out there and people are playing it, we get obviously huge amounts of feedback via all of our social channels. So they go into a backlog of things that we can look to do as well. We obviously have things that we've done in the game now that we think, well, maybe post-launch, we'd like to refine this, change this, add to this, build upon this. So those are all spec'd out now. So we have probably, 3, 4, 5, 6 defined drops of what we think we're going to do. And then things will move in and out of those categories. And once the game's out and live as well, we can obviously react to feedback.
Yeah, okay. And do you send out initial versions of the game to actual F1 drivers to test and get feedback on? And if you do, who are the biggest characters that actually, participate in that and give you the most feedback? I'm going to say Lando's got to be up there.
Well, this year's really the first year that we've had the opportunity to do that, because most of the drivers didn't have sims. That's something that the majority of them have only acquired in the last few months.
Yeah.
So now we're starting a beta program very soon. That kicks off soon. So there's a number of our community obviously who've signed up, and they'll all get beta keys and they'll be able to give us feedback. But yeah, we've already set aside a chunk of keys for the Formula 1 drivers as well. So yeah, we're really excited for them to start giving some feedback.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting. Okay, well, listen, Lee, I really honestly appreciate it. I genuinely can't wait for the game. I've become a huge fan of 2019, so I'm really looking forward to 2020, like I know so many people are. So I really appreciate you giving us so much insight into how it works, and I hope it's a massive success for you.
Cool, thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Lee. See you soon.
Cool. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Some really interesting stuff there, stuff I didn't know, and the interaction with the drivers having changed because of the current situation we're all in it must be a real plus for you. But really interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean, how busy they are. They just don't have any spare time, and now they've suddenly got buckets of it. So